Hello, my name is Tosca Bruno van Vijveken and I co-direct the Transnational NGO Initiative here at the Maxwell School. Today I'm undertaking an interview with Nisha Agrawal, who is the CEO of Oxfam India, part of the global Oxfam International Confederation. And thanks for allowing us to interview you today for our website. So a lot of people know Oxfam. It has a big brand name, but still, tell me, what is the nature and mission of the organization?
So Oxfam International is a global confederation of 17 Oxfams.
Okay.
And Oxfam India is one of them. I would say we are all, if you had to say it simply, we are rights-based advocacy organizations. That's what we do. We advocate for the rights of poor and marginalized people. And we'll try and link the grassroots program all the way from the village level to national as well as global. So we see... we try and feed poor people's voices into global policy making and as well as lobby global players because their actions and their policies, etc., influence the poor people that we care about.
So just probe for one moment. Advocacy organization, rights-based advocacy, does that mean you don't do any service delivery at all, or do you? And how is that related, if so?
So we do three kinds of things. The humanitarian work is very important. We started with that. And we still go in that way. We go in ourselves to provide relief wherever there's a disaster. It's the way we started and it's really in our DNA. But more and more, even that we recognize really the main player has to be the state. And we go in there to be on the ground so that we can see what's going on and we can also lobby the government to be a more effective player. Then we do development projects, lot of grassroots work. But more and more, even that grassroots work is really not about parallel service delivery. It's about making government policies and programs work on the ground for the most marginalized people. So it is grassroots work. It's not just pure advocacy work. So we are not a Greenpeace or an Amnesty. Our work is very linked to what we do on the ground. And then the third part is linking this grassroots work and this humanitarian work, which is very concrete work on the ground, then through our knowledge of seeing what works and what doesn't work, to policy making and to then lobbying the global players as well, corporates and global institutions and governments and bodies like the G20, linking it all the way, but that grassroots work is where we start.
Okay. Now, so let's jump immediately to the big question of effectiveness. How does your organization define effectiveness and how do you know when you're effective? What does that look like to be effective in the case of Oxfam?
So I think on humanitarian, it becomes harder and harder as you go from humanitarian to program to advocacy to know whether you're having impact. In the humanitarian work, we have standards, global standards that we meet in our work, how quickly we are in terms of responding, how, the kind of work we do, the quality of our interventions. And we are very good about measuring that halfway through the work. Even during an emergency, we sit down and we do what is called a real-time evaluation. We get beneficiary feedback, we get feedback from different stakeholders. Are we doing it in the right way? Are we reaching the right people? So there we have a very clear sense of are we being effective or not. Then we move to development programs. Again, that becomes already more complex. We might be trying to fix the healthcare system or the school system, but then you're no longer the only player in a way in that space, and so many things are changing around you. But still, because a lot of that work is funded by specific donors who want to see, you think through in 3 years' time, where do I want to take this group of people? Do their incomes have to go up by X%? Does their voice have to go up? Do they have to attend more meetings? Do they have to participate? So still more concrete things and more measurable things in terms of number of beneficiaries and what they're achieving, how many more kids have access to school or healthcare, all of that. So I think there also now there's, talk of new methods of evaluating, but it's kind of clear. Then it becomes a little harder when you're saying, we funded NGOs to get in place a good domestic violence law, or we funded NGOs to get in place a good right to education law. I mean, that kind of change happens only every few decades, but you are funding it for a long, long period. Could it have been done earlier if you had done something different? I mean, that is hard to measure. And then the hardest to measure is really campaign work, where we are trying to change social attitudes. You want to reduce the acceptability of violence in people's lives, or you want to reduce discrimination. How do you measure that? And you might even be able to measure change in attitude. But did it lead to a real change in behavior? Then you have to follow those same people from kids to older adults, and very few of us really have the resources to be able to do a very good job with that.
Yes.
So I think we are on that continuum, but more and more I think donors are demanding, but everybody else is demanding. I mean, we are being funded locally. Corporates want to know what we deliver. Governments want to know. So I think NGOs, just like any other development player, are really having to think through these issues of how do we measure our effectiveness.
And so thinking about Oxfam India and its relatively new status as the 15th of the 17 members of the Confederation, what are some of the, let's say, 1 to core challenges that you as the leader of Oxfam India are facing now in further shaping this organization 5 years into its existence?
So on the programs, I think starting with where we are really solid, I would say, is the governance of the organization and also the financial management and the systems. I think these two are very strong and we're very proud of them. On the program side, the challenge is how do we go from being a funding or a donor organization to a actor in the civil society space? What is our role? We fund 200 NGOs, they do their advocacy, they do their campaigning. Does Oxfam India have a role, and how do we carve it without taking it away from our partners? So that's the big challenge. We've been doing it slowly and step by step to see where we can add value. So for example, we fund a network of mining NGOs in India, and they're lobbying for a mining law, So networking them, bringing them together, organizing a workshop on what a good mining law should look like, writing a policy brief, using that to then lobby parliamentarians, government, etc. I mean, so linking the grassroots work and drawing the knowledge out of it and then doing the policy advocacy at the national level, because most of our partners are at the state level. I think that's where we're building our own capacity to do that. On the program side, the other big thing is like really recognizing for the first time that it's not enough to get laws in place or even their implementation in place, but what the kinds of issues we care about, whether it's discrimination against women or lower caste people or on the basis of religion and so on, you have to change attitudes. And just by working with the poor, which is where our whole emphasis has been for 60 years, is not going to be enough. And how do we reach out then to this other half of India who have the same attitudes, whether it's on violence against women? It's not just a poverty issue.
Right.
The middle class have the same problems and the same issues. So how to do development education of the other half of India? What access do we have? What are the tools to be used there? How do we persuade them? Where do we start? And so on. So that's a big challenge for us. And then I would say really the biggest challenge is, of course, fundraising. India is now a middle income country. Assistance from overseas is drying up. Donor presence is drying up. The money that used to come to us through other Oxfams is drying up because they're kind of saying, you're a middle income country. Our priority is fragile states and low income countries. Now you need to raise your own funds, which is right because we have a lot of wealth in India. But that culture of giving hasn't come yet. But we think it will come in 3 to 5 years when we are now approaching them. We are showing what we are doing. People are beginning to understand what an NGO is. But we are just a little bit away from where we can fund ourselves. So I think that is really the biggest challenge right now, how to create that culture of giving in India.
That's a very nice, it's a succinct summary of your challenges. So we have about a minute left. And let me ask you finally about leadership. What leadership skills, formal but also informal, are crucial to being an effective leader in Oxfam India, you think?
We are going through a very massive change process, and it's also a never-ending change process because the context is changing so rapidly. So we feel we've been 5 years into the journey, and when I took over this role, I really didn't have much of an experience of change management, coming from 20 years in the World Bank, which, I mean, occasionally changes, but it's also a large, very stable organization in some ways, to this thing which was just you had to shape it, its values, its culture. The program had to be shifted entirely from the south and west of India to where poverty is today in the north and east, finding new partners, finding new ways of working, creating our identity as a policy, research, campaign organization, working with governments. Very difficult from just writing a check and monitoring the spending of that money, which is all we've done. So massive challenges which are evolving day by day. More policy spaces opening up. We need to be ready for that, So I think you need to be somebody who thrives on change. I mean, and not everybody does. So that's really the very first characteristic, that you're looking to try things. you're okay with failure, because half of what you try will not work, because no one has ever done it before. You shouldn't take it as a personal setback of any kind. This is how it is. Being very flexible, being nimble, being willing to try things. I mean, this is the kind of leadership that we're looking for.
That you're needing right now. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been very helpful.
Thank you.